Welcome to the Hidden Potential Podcast. I'm your host, Homer Hargrove, and today we're going to be talking about how to protect your marriage in ministry. And in this talk, I'm going to give you 3 takeaways at the end so that you can apply it directly to your leadership. Every single week, we're giving you a new episode to be able to help you tap into your hidden potential. We do that with practical and mental tools that you're able to use directly in your organization. Let's get started with a big thought, and that is ministry can quickly take a toll on your marriage if you're not careful. Many marriages experience difficult times regardless of whether or not you're in ministry, but there are certain aspects of ministry that can make certain problems specific to ministry within a marriage. And many great marriages have been damaged or even broken because of these unexpected tolls and problems that are brought into it. And today we're going to talk about common pitfalls within marriage and ministry that can be, and I'm going to share with you some tips to help you avoid these problematic situations altogether. And I'm going to give you direction on how to respond to certain issues as they come up. The reason that this is so important to talk about is because your marriage should be a safe haven from the stress and the demands of this world and in ministry. But if it's left unprotected, it can easily turn into a swamp that collects all of the negative emotions, all of the junk in your life and ministry. So you must learn how to protect yourself and your marriage so that you can experience the joy of marriage along with the joy of ministry. If not, they both will feel like, instead of a safe haven, a living hell. So we're going to break up today's episode into 2 big portions. These supersets are going to be starting off with protecting your privacy. Protect your privacy. I feel like when I was younger, I never really had a concept of privacy. Now that I'm older, especially now that I have kids, I understand what privacy is because you don't get much of it. With every kid you have, you lose less and less privacy. And within your marriage, there's certain aspects of privacy that should be non-negotiables. Starting off with the idea of having a date night. See, that is something that is private between you and your spouse. That is a private moment. And just like ministry success requires you to put in the time and effort, so does marriage success. And having a regular date night is a pivotal step to developing endurance in your marriage as well as passion for your marriage. It's easy to make excuses to skip your next date night, but there will be a time when you truly don't have the opportunity to go out on a date so easily like you did before. You will be a better minister on top of that when you have a better marriage. Being passionate in one area of your life will bleed over to other areas of your life. And just to kind of sidestep on this date night idea, there's a lot of couples that have regular date nights. I'm telling you, is a lifeblood to your marriage. And it's so easy for ministry to continue to push to where that date night getting put on the back burner. You need to make this a non-negotiable in your life. There's times where it's like, yeah, life doesn't work out perfectly and you have to postpone. But if it's a consistent, regular thing to where you're putting off date night, you have a problem. Date night produces passion, and passion is what you need in your marriage. You need that romantic life, and that passion will bleed over into your faith, into your ministry. You need it within your marriage. Next, let's talk about how within it comes to protecting your privacy. Don't talk trash about your spouse. And I mean this in multiple forms. Yes, even just when you're shooting your shots with the guys, when you just or when you're talking with the girls, you should refrain from talking trash about your spouse. I'm not saying that you can't talk about, simple frustrations, but you should do so in a way that's not just bashing your spouse. Do so in a way with integrity to where you can share some frustrations, but not in a way that's talking trash. And now I want you to now take the scope as ministry, being a minister often implies that you have these public speaking moments. And how would you like it if you got put on blast in front of an audience? Or how do you think you'd feel if your spouse was giving everyone this stained image of you without you able to defend yourself or share your side of the story? See, I feel like this should be a common understanding, but I find that ministers are quick to use these personal stories in an effort to prove a point, and it can really be messed up. It's not right, and I think that there's a lot of ministers that take a moment to just randomly use their spouse as an example on stage, and if the shoe was on the other foot, they would have a huge hissy fit if they were talked about that way. If they were exposed like that, they wouldn't like it that much. And you must understand that your spouse is not a means to an end. They are not a prop for your sermon. And I'm not saying that you can't ever share something personal that in your message, but I am saying that you shouldn't share stories that give a bad impression of your spouse. There are plenty of other ways that you could support your point while still supporting your spouse. Y'all dig what I'm saying? And this needs to be stuck within your head. Do not talk trash about your spouse. Even if they don't say anything, it hurts them deep down. It's like what did Mary say every time something crazy would happen with Jesus when she was his mother? It said she would store these things deep within her heart. Every time that you talk poorly about your spouse, especially on a stage, you're causing up those little morsels of hurt in their heart, and it's storing up something that you're sowing something that you're not going to want to reap. Now, the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to protecting your privacy is limit your availability to others. Limit your availability to others. In ministry, there are slow times, there's busy times, and then there's just plain out inconvenient times. And you must learn how to discern and even communicate with your spouse about the moments in which you will not allow yourself to be available. Maybe just start by choosing only certain days and evenings that you are able to do meetings or counseling sessions, even if you're not technically free even if you are technically free on the other days. For example, there's a recent time where, and this for me and my wife, it changes periodically given how busy or slow our ministry time is. In what we're doing in life and how young our kids are, it changes periodically. So it might be an ongoing discussion from, quarter to quarter of the year. But for us, there's a time where we agreed that only Tuesdays and Wednesdays we were able to do meetings or counseling sessions. And they're often for us, our counseling sessions are after we put our kids down. So you're talking about 7:45 at night and having a counseling session or having a meeting with volunteers. And we've had to adapt that because when it was like, oh, well, we only have we have free time on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and maybe Saturday. And we open up so much. What happened was we would fill the week so quickly, like instantly that week would be filled. And by the end of the week, we're so burnt out, we're so tired, and because we're exasperated, we don't have any intimate time together. You try having some intimate time after you've been having a full work day, and then in the evenings you still got counseling and meeting. It's hard to be intimate, and it is straining on your marriage to overwhelm yourself like that. You have to stop yourself from having burnout by limiting your availability, because when you have burnout, your marriage will have burnout. And it's simple. It's simple by saying, I can only meet on these days, and give yourself a free day or two. Give yourself some time because you'll need it. And now you have to, as you give yourself this breathing room, you'll save yourself from feeling overwhelmed. The same goes for having special days like anniversaries and birthdays. Do not put ministry above your marriage. you have to do your due diligence and plan ahead. You're gonna have to get away from doing these events where you're planning it the week of or 2 weeks out, and you need to do your due diligence, putting some birthdays and anniversaries, important events on your calendar. You're just gonna have to get more organized, because so often people, it's like you're in that meeting like, how does the 13th work? And you're like, oh, well, I think I'm free. You don't even check your calendar. You're just like, yeah, I don't see why I wouldn't. And then the week of, you're like, oh man, it's her birthday. You need to do your due diligence and really check. You should be checking every event that's planned. Does this fall on a special day? Because that will determine whether or not I can do it. And if you start thinking lightly about those special days and you count them as less than the event, over time, it will suffocate what makes your marriage feel special. Think about it. You are belittling a special day, and then a couple years from now, your marriage no longer feels that special. Well, you did it to yourself, dummy. You're not making those special moments special. And there will always be another event. There's always going to be another ministry day, but that time, that an anniversary, that happens once a year. You tell me out of all the 365 days, it has to be on this specific day, the one day that's your anniversary? Get out of here. You need to plan better. Y'all feel what I'm saying? So and I want to look. I know I'm saying that you really need to be strict about this. There will be times in which you compromise and you make exceptions. There's plenty of times where me and my wife, a day that we said we couldn't meet, it was, a special instance. It seemed like a very unique instance in which we both communicated and clearly agreed upon first before saying yes to it. You have to talk to your spouse. If you're going to compromise on a special day, if you're going to compromise on a date night, if you're going to compromise on a day that you plan to be off, you need to talk about it with your spouse first, because you need to remember that those times and those days are valuable. And when you're exchanging a ministry moment for it, it doesn't just affect you, it affects your marriage. And you have to be able to talk to your spouse about it first. So now that we understand a greater scope of protecting your privacy, I'm telling you, your privacy is important. When you don't realize it until it's gone. The second chunk of this is I'm going to talk about the simple idea of don't play with hoes. And I'm talking all about being around promiscuous people, being around people that are trying to, in a sense, get with you. I'm talking about don't play with hoes. And it may seem like I'm being a little bit too far, a little bit vulgar, but you don't have to look very far to find a story about a minister that was exposed for sexual misconduct or adultery. It happens way too often, and I think that it's because most of us don't expect so many sexual opportunities when we first pick up the call to ministry. When you say, oh, one day I want to be a minister or pastor or whatever, you don't necessarily think that that's how I'm gonna get some. That's how I'm gonna be able to sleep around or date. That's no one necessarily thinks that. And if you do, like, dang, you should step away. See, I'm not necessarily going to get into all of the different reasons or motivations behind it, but you need to pay attention to weird vibes, okay? There's certain people, when you're in the call of ministry, it might be during a time of ministry, it might be just a time where you go into the store, where certain people will hit on you or flirt with you, and it's the same from being a minister. You're doing ministry, and all of a sudden, someone feels attracted to you, and it's just, you just know that it's this thing. And even in ministry, sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's spiritual, sometimes it's just people being lonely, sometimes it's just people being horny. No matter what's driving them, you need to be aware of it and ready to divert from it. You need to pay attention to those weird vibes. You know, when someone's looking at you a certain way, maybe you're talking to them and they give a little batting of the eyes. You need to pay attention to stuff like that, and you need to know that that's a weird vibe. If someone is a little more physical with you, maybe they're just like, oh my gosh, and they're putting their hand on your back a lot, you need to pay attention. That's a weird vibe. And if you continue to ignore it, it's only going to escalate. Now that's going to eventually lead into opportunities, and we're going to talk about how you need to run from opportunities. Remember, you're not going to play with no hose, and so you need to run from some opportunities. Whenever you pick up on that kind of vibe, you need to limit yourself to that person. Only allow access when there's somebody else present. Don't be alone with that person one-on-one. It's not safe. You can't put yourself alone with them, especially in an intimate one-on-one situation. You can no longer counsel that person one-on-one, or even just pray for that person one-on-one. You can't make excuses as to why you should minister to them anyway. If you pick up on a weird vibe and you tell yourself, well, they still need ministry. Yeah, but they don't need it from you, dog. That you can step away. There's somebody else that could fulfill that calling, okay? You do not need to be the one to stand in the gap for that person if they're giving off some weird vibe, because it is a trap for you. You simply just need to back up and let someone else minister to them if you have to. It's not worth ruining your life. It's not worth ruining your marriage. Don't make excuses. Run from those kind of vibes. Run from those sexual opportunities. Especially if it makes you feel a flood over your heart, you need to get out of there quick, because you are only deceiving yourself. You're giving into a temptation, fantasy, even no matter how small it is. You need to get away from it, because what ends up happening is you're going to end up playing around with a hoe. And look, I'm not trying to be mean or belittle people who are crying out for attention, are lonely. They can get that somewhere else. It doesn't matter if it's maturity or not. They don't need to be playing around with you. You need to get away from them. They can mature, they can grow, they can get closer to God through someone else. They don't need you. So, and finally, this is what will help you the most. This is super practical, and this is be transparent with your spouse. The best way, in my opinion, to be able to guard yourself against the hoes of the world is to be fully transparent and even accountable to your spouse. Talking to them about potential weird vibes, or asking them their perspective on certain situations, certain interactions, will help strengthen the trust in your marriage, as well as the integrity for you to resist temptation to flirt with the idea. See, what happens is that ministers will get that weird vibe, but they like how it feels. It feels good to get attention. It feels good to be wanted. And so they begin to flirt with that idea. Rather than letting it even get that far, you need to be transparent with your spouse and tell them, oh, this person was talking to me this way and I felt like it was kind of weird. I'm not saying that you have to necessarily expose a feeling that you had. You don't have to necessarily put yourself out there and say, and I kind of liked it. You don't need to make it weirder than it already is, okay? Just say, look, I noticed this interaction. It was weird, and I just want to talk about it. Did you notice anything? And as an extra credit, I personally think that couples should have full access to each other's phones, to each other's phones, each other's apps, to each other's emails, because nothing should be hidden within a marriage. Mold, think about this, mold can only grow in darkness, and then it silently kills. That's what it's like with secrecy. It grows in silence, it grows in this darkness. But having full transparency, it helps eliminate the temptation to mess around. You don't even have to think about it. You don't have to play with it in your head, because with your spouse having full access to your phone, to your apps, to your email, it helps you to not even make it an option, even if you wanted to. You throw out the idea of temptation because you know that it's not a possibility. It helps strengthen you. And I want to just sidestep real quick. I want to be clear in saying I'm talking about specifically these situations in which a person is coming onto a minister. And I'm telling you, it happens a lot. It's like crazy how often it happens. But I want to be clear in saying I am not at all trying to belittle the moments in which a spiritual leader took advantage of someone that was hurting and used them for sexual gain. That happens a lot too. I'm not talking about that. At the end of the day, you're a spiritual leader. You're responsible. If you fall into sin, you fall into adultery, that's on you, dog. It's not the person's fault. If anything, they will be the victim of your actions, because regardless of if they wanted it or not, they are vulnerable and they trust you as a leader to lead them to God. And if you're painting yourself as the doorway for them, and it can be confusing. It can be confusing for a person that's vulnerable, and you will inevitably be the one taking advantage of someone who's hurting. So again, I want to make it abundantly clear. I am not at all trying to say people who are victims of sexual misconduct of priests or pastors are hoes. I'm not trying to say it like that at all. I'm talking specifically about the moments where there's specific moments in which people are calling that minister away, and it's dangerous. Okay, I hope I make that abundantly clear. Now, let's end with 3 takeaways. Number 1, establish a regular date night with your spouse. Even if it has to be at home, set specific times to have intimate one-on-one quality time with your spouse. Number 2, create boundaries for yourself and your marriage by choosing specific times that you are available or unavailable for ministry and others. Remember, you need to limit your time, limit your availability. And finally, lay it all out and set parameters of transparency with your spouse, and ask them if they have ever felt weird about certain people or their interactions with you, and decide what your accountability will look like within your marriage. Again, for me, my wife has full access over my phone. I'm talking about even screen time. She's able to see how much time I spend on an app. She has all of my accounts on her phone. And those are not because she requested it, but because I wanted her to have it. I want full transparency with my spouse. Decide how specific, how personal that looks like for you and your marriage. All that being said, I hope that you enjoyed this episode today. Thank you for being a part of the Hidden Potential Podcast. Could you do me a favor? Could you leave a rating and review for this podcast? It would really help me out and help others to be able to see this show in their feed. Until next time, have a great life.